today. My guest is Tomekia Williams. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, as well as can be expected.
Yeah, other than the technical difficulties, I'm glad you're okay. Do you want to give yourself an introduction really quick?
Sure. My name is Tomekia Williams. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm originally from New York, and I have also lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where I met Pablo
Way back in middle school.
very long time ago.
I think it was sixth or seventh grade. I don't really remember.
I don't really remember either. I just remember that we lived in the same neighborhood and we used to hang out.
Do you remember I used to call you Tomekia?
Yes, I do remember that. A lot of people have called me that. But yes,
I
I
would
do
do,
remember.
I would do that just to kind of like mess with you a little bit.
That's why when I think about it, I'm like, were we really friends? I can't recall. Are we sure that that's what that was?
Yeah, I like to think that I've become a little bit more mature, but I don't know. A lot of my friends don't think so.
I can't say. So I'll
But
take your word for it.
yeah, you're living in Atlanta right now,
Correct.
and it's actually pretty interesting that you live in Georgia right now because every now and then I'll see on the news that Georgia is a swing state, quote
hmm
unquote. But I mean, realistically, I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure it's pretty red, right?
I mean, typically it has been, but it's getting closer to being purple, as they say, which is what
Hmm.
makes it a swing state. Will it ever be blue? I don't think so. Uh, I don't see that happening. But I think it's more realistic and more of a possibility now for it to actually be a swing state where we are in this current environment compared to years past.
Right. No, I mean, after 2016,
hmm
all hell broke loose.
Basically.
But from my understanding, there are two Senate races in Georgia. One of them is a very normal, I guess,
hmm
election for the Senate seat. Uh, just your typical Republican versus your typical Democrat. But the other Senate race is pretty unique and different. And can you explain why that is or what the situation is?
Sure. I think what makes that race unique is that basically it's a seat that was vacated by former Senator Johnny Isaacson. And the governor, I believe it was a year or two ago, replaced that seat with Kelly Loeffler, a businesswoman that he just chose. But now that seat is up for reelection, so she's running right now as the incumbent against another Republican, Doug Collins, and then another Democrat, Reverend Raphael Warnock, and then some other miscellaneous Democrats as well. But it's interesting because you have three top contenders, one of which is the incumbent. So that's why it's interesting.
How does that happen? Were there no primaries for this where they say, hey, who's going to end up being the representative for Republicans and representative for Democrats?
So I can't claim to know all of the ins and outs of that, but I know that part of it is because this is considered a special election because this is a seat that was vacated. So it's not a seat that's just up for term like the
Right.
Perdue seat that John Ossoff is running for. This one is considered a special election. So I think that that's part of the reason why. I do think that it's interesting on the Republican side that you have another Republican running against her as the incumbent.
Yeah. And how has the pandemic played a role into all of this, right? So every state seems to be different.
hmm
And I'm guessing that part of the reason there might be another Republican running against her is due to the handling of the COVID, or what's your
I
sense
don't,
in Georgia with the whole pandemic?
I don't think it's a. it has anything to do with that. So the Doug Collins, who's running against her, is a current representative, House of Representative, and apparently he's the choice of establishment Republicans, to my understanding, where
Mm,
Kelly Loeffler is the more aligned with President Trump. So I think that's why you have the two different choices there,
gotcha.
to my understanding. But as far as the pandemic is concerned, people at my job ask me that too, like, oh, well, how are things in Georgia? Because we're a global company and things are, handled differently in different locations.
Hmm.
I pretty much say that there is no pandemic here. I, when our governor was one of the first to reopen from lockdown and
Oh
things
yeah,
open,
Georgia was one of the first states, right?
yeah, it was. It was one of the last to close, but one of the first to open. So, um, when you look at it here, the way things are for the most part, you wouldn't know that we're in a pandemic as far as the government is concerned, as far as the level of people wearing masks and social distancing that you see these days. You really wouldn't know,
So are all businesses open 100%?
basically. There are some limited restrictions, to my understanding, that he has for nursing home visitation that you can visit now, but there's certain parameters and things like that. But for the most part, bars are open, restaurants are open, hair salons, bowling alleys, those were the first things to open because that was essential, apparently. Uh, um,
Gotta get the
there's
bowling in.
apparently that was one of the first things that people needed to do out of quarantine is let me go bowling in some community shoes. But
And I'm
okay.
guessing that part of the argument is that Georgia isn't, I don't know, New York City, right? It's not, there's not
hmm
millions of people just stacked on top of each other.
Millions of people know, but it also depends on you. The thing that's unique about Georgia, which is part of the reason why I moved to Georgia, is it's what I call city country. So you have Metro Atlanta, which is a major metropolitan city, and then you have suburbs that surround that. Those are heavily populated. Now, when you branch out and you get to northern Georgia and southern Georgia and things like that, no, it is more of a country atmosphere. But in those cities and those suburbs, you do have densely populated areas. Is it densely populated the way New York City is? No, absolutely not.
Does the city of Atlanta treat this different?
It's a great question. If you've been watching the news, over the last couple of months, that was part of what made this a national issue is that the Atlanta mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, wanted to be more aggressive in locking down the city, requiring masks and various things like that, where the governor did not. The governor apparently wanted more of a laissez-faire approach, and part of that, as the mayor of Atlanta wanted to continue to protect the citizens and push those mandates, Governor Brian Kemp decided to sue her and the city of Atlanta for those
Huh.
mandates, which, yeah. So that was like a couple months ago. Big surprise. He dropped that lawsuit. He dropped that lawsuit because as they were battling this, the cases in Georgia continued to rise. So it kind of
Mm.
negated his argument, which his argument was the economy and that she was hurting the Georgia economy by continuing to have these restrictions. Based based on that argument is why he decided to sue her for this. But as our cases and hospitalizations and deaths continued to rise, obviously he came to the conclusion maybe that wasn't the best way to go, and he dropped the lawsuit.
Do you think that Atlanta itself, where you live, has handled it okay? And what about your daily life, right? Are you going bowling as soon as they opened up? Or how's that going?
So for me, I'm kind of in a different situation. So I don't live in Metro Atlanta. I live in a suburb northwest of Atlanta. So I don't live in the actual city.
Mhm.
And I used to work in the city, but since the pandemic, I've been working from home. So for me, it is a little bit different. I make my own choices. I have personal responsibility. So, no, I have not been going bowling. I have not been going to restaurants um, because my mother is high risk. She has asthma.
Mm,
So, I wouldn't want to do those unnecessary things and not only
right.
put my own life at risk, but also put her life at risk as well.
And clearly, you are a little bit more responsible than those people that are going bowling day one. But how has that affected you? Because I know, talking to people all the time, you can meet some people that just don't want to go outside, period, right? To be safe.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then there are some people that, you know, did their best, but they're like, hey, you know what? It's been months. I have to live my life, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
the whole thing affected you mentally and maybe even physically or financially.
So I'm very fortunate in the sense that I haven't had any negative effects of the pandemic. So thankfully, I'm gainfully employed. My employer has been very flexible when it comes to the pandemic. So we're actually working from home up until the middle of next year. They said work wherever you feel comfortable. So I'm very thankful for that. And
They
yeah.
already they already declared that?
Yeah, they said that a couple months ago. It was right after I want to say like Facebook or Google said it. So I work for a tech company, so they're trying to keep in line with them.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, so they said summertime next year. Um, so I've been fortunate in that regard. Um, like I said, I'm gainfully employed. Nothing has really affected me. Thankfully, no one that I know personally has been affected from the virus. I am concerned about my mother on a regular basis because she does work for an airline at the airport. So she's also in a high risk environment.
Mm.
Um, but thankfully, thus far, she's been okay. I haven't had any negative effects. I do deal with it on a regular basis, though, because I do manage benefits for my employer. So I'm talking to people who have been diagnosed, whose family members have been diagnosed, and now they need to take a leave of absence to care for them. So I do deal with it in that regard. But thankfully, I haven't been negatively affected personally.
And the people that have been affected by it, who you talk with,
Hmm.
what is usually their situation? Like, do they
Hmm.
need medical leave? What's that situation like?
So something, and I think that's good for people to understand too, is that so part of what was passed in the CARES Act and the Families First Act by the government in early March is for you to be able to take paid time off if you have coronavirus, if an immediate family member has coronavirus, but also if you just need childcare because schools were closed, daycares were closed, all of that. So a good portion of the people that I've been talking to, that's the kind of leave that they need. It's just that they just need to take care of their children because schools were closed. We've had a handful of actual cases, um, but for the most part, they haven't been anything serious. Like we thankfully haven't had any fatalities from the virus or anything like that.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. And that was a federal government.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so that was a part of the CARES Act and the Families First Act.
huh. I did not, partially because I don't have children, but so if people need to take time off because they need to help their kids with schooling or whatever,
Hmm.
they have that right, and the employer has to kind of respect that.
True, and there's, some stipulations to that. So it's only mandated to be paid for employers that have 500 or less employees in the United States.
Mm,
So that's a key point too. Now, if you have more than that, you have to offer the leave, but it doesn't have to be paid.
interesting. Yeah, so that's another thing that kind of gets lost in the news, right?
Hmm.
Not that I have any. I don't consume enough of the news just because I don't really like following the news too much these days. But a lot of the times they focus on the negative, right?
Yeah.
And the few things that do come out of the government that's functional or a good decision, you don't really hear about it. So
I
then
would
people
agree.
don't know that they have those rights. Um,
Yeah.
but that's interesting.
That's a big part of what I do and why I'm in this career field is education. And a lot of people don't understand their benefits and how they work until they need them. And then by then, it's too late. If you're underinsured, it's too late at that point in time. So I do wish people in America in particular understood FMLA, ACA, the Affordable Care Act, or as some people like to call it, Obamacare, but I don't care for that name as someone who's in the benefits industry. It's ACA, Affordable Care Act. Um, but people just need to understand those things more, particularly since we are in this hotly contested election year. You should really understand what type of rights and laws you're voting for when you're circling that bubble for that candidate's name.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm super guilty of that. I couldn't tell you anything about my benefits right now.
Shameful.
No, yeah, I'm super guilty of that. Super guilty. But I'm also in that situation, like you said, I'm ignorant because I'm not using it.
Hmm.
But as soon as it does come a time when I do need it, is when I'll come to find out that I'm underinsured or
Hmm.
something's not covered or
Hmm.
and it's just so easy to not focus on something that you're not using.
Hmm.
So super guilty on that. And why do you why did you say that you hate the term or the name Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act?
Because, well, first of all, that's not what the law says. That's not what it's actually called. But also because it's used in such a negative connotation, and I think people use it in that way, not realizing that they're taking advantage of the benefits from it. So people say Obamacare in a negative connotation, but
Mhm.
if you have a child that's over the age of 18 or 19 that you're covering on your employer's benefit, that's thanks to ACA or Obamacare. If you have a pre-existing condition and you have health insurance right now and you're not being charged an increased premium because of it, that's thanks to Obamacare. If you're getting free prescription drugs right now for certain conditions, that's thanks to Obamacare. So it's things like that it has this negative connotation, but there's millions of people in this country that are taking advantage of those benefits. It bothers me when people say it that way.
Right. They play their they use the fear and the distrust of Obama to kind of sway opinion, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Especially down south. I mean, when I
Yeah.
was living in North Carolina, good lord.
Yeah, it's a struggle
Yeah,
sometimes. It's a struggle. It's a struggle sometimes. Yeah.
put it lightly. No, I've seen clips of, you know, Republican rallies where people go up there and they're like, "Hey, how would you support, a health plan, let's just call it Affordable Care Act where
Hmm.
they cover this, this and this." And they're like, "Oh yeah, of course." And then they're like, "Oh, but what do you feel about Obamacare?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, screw Obamacare, you know?"
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Oh my god.
Yep. And I think as much as sometimes it's hard for me to live in the South part of my with my beliefs and things that are important to me and also being African American, I do feel like that's part of the problem. I think going back to something else that you asked about with swing states and red and blue states, I don't think that that should exist. I don't think we should have red and blue states. I think part of the problem is when Democrats just consolidate in certain pockets of the country, and that's why you have that. I think Democrats need to spread across the country to even the playing field. That's part of why we have this dynamic, and we all want to live somewhere where our vote matters. And I think that's why it's hard when you're when you live in the South, but you're also a Democrat. So I feel like that's part of the problem. I don't want to just have to live in New York. Been there, done that. It's expensive. So I don't want to be forced to live in New York or California, also expensive, for my vote to matter. So I do feel like we need to expand across the country, spread out, even that playing field, so you don't have just these red states and those blue states.
Why do you think that happens? Why do you think it's such a consolidation of the Democratic Party? Or you could probably make that argument about the Republican Party as well, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's historical. I think it's historical. That's where democratic ideologies resonate. That's where those platforms are changed from just platforms into laws. So I think that's where you go. You want to go somewhere that they have laws that support what you believe in and what you think is right. So I think it makes sense and it fits with a certain cultural value that you want. But I think in order to change that, you have to spread out. You don't want to be in a situation where because I'm a Democrat, I can't live in Texas. Because I'm a Democrat, I can't live in Kentucky because my vote won't matter. So I think it's up to us to just change that. But I think it's a historical basis, and that's where it's just naturally aligned, I guess. But I do think what you're seeing, particularly in North Carolina, in Georgia, a lot of these southern states that are becoming purple, as they call it, will they become blue? I don't know, but I don't think they need to be blue states. I don't think that the country needs to be run completely by Democrats. You have to have people of opposing viewpoints for us to move forward. I'm not saying that all Republicans are nutcases, even though a lot of them are, in my point of view. We need that, but we need sense. We need logic. Bipartisanship is just like this historical term now. It doesn't exist. And we're getting so far away from it. It's concerning if we'll ever get back to it.
Yeah, I wish more people thought like you.
So do I.
That is, I mean, you literally just laid it out perfectly because when I left North Carolina, I was surrounded by a lot of, oh, stupid liberals, they don't know anything.
Mhm.
And it was Republican or bust.
Yep.
And when I moved to New York, I was actually expecting, and maybe it was silly of me to expect this, but I was expecting people to be a little bit more open minded in
Mhm.
terms of, oh, we don't care if you're, liberal or
Yeah.
conservative, have an intelligent conversation.
Yeah.
And I was surprised. And, 2016 might be a part of why this happened, but
Mhm.
I show up here and literally, if they sniff any amounts of conservative on you, they will bash you.
Yeah.
And it's the complete opposite of the South, North Carolina,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Where if you're liberal at all, you're a dumbass. Up here, if you're conservative at all, you're a dumbass.
Mhm.
And that's not how we move forward, right?
No, and I agree with that. I think that's part of the issue of where we are as a country is that so many people are moving into their little corners in their little box
Hmm.
that no one's in the middle. Is that you have to be all of something or all of nothing, and that there's no way in the middle. But what people on both sides have to understand, we'll all just stay here. Like we
Hmm.
we can't say that we're a country that cares about everyone and then in these situations say I only care about you if you agree with me. And Democrats are guilty of that, Republicans are very guilty of that. But Democrats
Hmm.
are also guilty of that as well.
I mean, I used to get into lots of arguments down south about my liberal views, and then I moved up here and now I've gotten into a lot of arguments because I don't agree with all liberal views, and so then automatically I become a southern conservative Republican Trump supporter.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, hey, what? No, that that's not true at all.
Yeah.
uh, no, but yeah, we definitely need more people like you to kind of be reasonable, right?
I mean, and I don't know. how we got so far off the cliff. I mean, although I think it's fair to say that this current president and administration has lit a fire under a lot of those issues, you cannot
Oh
say
yeah.
that he started them. They were there already. What I think is interesting is that there's certain groups that are highlighted right now on both sides. And I say that as far as people who are super far right, they are living right now. They're having the time of their life. But then on the other side, people who are super far left are just so fired up, trying to eradicate any sense of that, that I'm also like, well, let's be reasonable with some of these things, that you can't have free things without someone paying for it. So nothing in
Right.
life is free. So although it sounds nice to have free healthcare and to have free education all the way up to college, we have to think clearly as to how we're going to pay for that. And also, what does that do for wages? What does that do for businesses? And one of the things that I'll say that I deal with in my career is one of the things that I manage is Canadian healthcare benefits. And they have
Hmm.
socialized medicine, which is what
Right.
certain people in America say that we need. What I don't think those people, the politicians that promote that, they may or may not be aware of, but I know most Americans are not aware of, is they have a very big supply and demand issue in Canada where because everyone has health insurance, they don't have enough doctors and hospitals for when certain things happen. Because of that, I have a I worked with a broker whose husband needed a surgery. He couldn't get in just to have an MRI for that surgery for 6 months. So what did they end up doing? Hopping the border to Michigan, United States of America, to get the MRI paid for it out of pocket just so they could go back to Canada so he could have the surgery. That would never work in America. Americans want too much instant gratification. They're not going to wait for that. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work.
Right. No, it's funny that you say that because, one of my personal beliefs is that we need to kind of eradicate this whole private insurance thing, for medical
Mhm.
purpose, just because I've seen way too many stories about people getting screwed over or they can't afford their cancer treatment or whatever, right? It's just terrible. Um, but actually, one of my earlier guests, Robert Penner, he's from Canada,
Uh-huh.
and he was talking about some of the, you know, benefits and some of the drawbacks of socialized medicine. And
Mhm.
from what he was telling me, is that if there's an emergency, if something's wrong, they're never gonna make you wait, right?
Mhm.
But if you go in and you say, "Hey, my back's been bothering me, I can still do my everyday thing," that's when those situations come in where, all right, cool, you'll get an MRI in 6 to 12 months.
Mhm.
And yeah, that wouldn't fly here. And I think that
No.
that's a very common tactic that Republicans use, to say, "Hey, do you really want to wait 6 months?" And everyone's like, "No, when I download Instagram, I want instant gratification. I want a like button, and I
Exactly.
want to." So there's got to be something that we can
Well,
work out here.
what I can say is someone who works in benefits in the healthcare industry and things like that. I don't I don't think there's a problem with private insurance, just like anything else. Part of one of the many benefits of America is choice. I can buy a cheap
Hmm.
version of something, but I also have the opportunity to buy the expensive version that maybe has more bells and whistles if I
Right.
want. If I want, I have that option. So the real issue with healthcare in America that no one wants to talk about, which goes back to insurance companies and hospitals, is why does certain services cost so much? So what people don't realize is when I go to have a surgery and it costs me $35,000 and the insurance company is going to pay $10,000 of that, and then I have to pick up the rest, or I'll say 20, the insurance company is going to pay 20,000, I need to pay the other 15. Why does that surgery cost $35,000? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
That's the
Yep.
real issue with our
Mhm.
healthcare is the cost of the services, because there's no regulation on how much hospital A can charge you for the same surgery that hospital B is charging you, because there's no regulation in those types of things, that's where you have inflated insurance prices. Because as it costs insurance companies more to pay for things, it's going to cost you more to pay for things. So the root of the problem is the cost of the actual services. Why does it cost me $500 to talk to my doctor for 5 minutes? Like it's those
Right.
things that I feel like we don't talk about enough in this country. We just focus on insurance, and it's the insurance company's fault, and insurance is too expensive. But that's always going to be the case if the providers of the healthcare services can charge whatever they want.
Is aren't we kind of in a pickle, because if all of a sudden you say, "Hey, we're going to introduce legislation and regulations to limit how much these hospitals can charge," all of a sudden you can't pay doctors as much, right? Because X, Y, and Z. Would that not introduce also some sort of supply and demand issue?
Potentially. I think it can potentially, but I think we don't know the answer to that because no one's looking into that. So
Right.
no one's saying, well, the cost of an MRI really, it's really $10,000 and the other 15 is for labor. Like when you get your car worked on,
Right.
$10 is the part, but the other $100 is labor. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
But we know that we don't have that level of insight when it comes to healthcare services for the most part. So I think that's what it is. We don't know enough about how that pricing works and what type of agreements that insurance companies have with in-network providers and things like that to even answer that question. But I think it's a valid question, but I don't think that the solution is, okay, everyone has socialized medicine, because who is paying those doctors and those nurses what they're getting now? Because that money is
Do you
still
think
coming from somewhere.
right. Do you think that that combination then of everyone is guaranteed health care, but if you want to buy, as they say, a Cadillac plan with a
Hmm.
private insurance company, you can do that. Do you think that that would be a viable solution?
I think so, based on my experience in the industry, because most of us want choice. We want the choice to be able to upgrade. If I want to keep that basic plan, then and it suits my needs, then that's fine. But if I'm willing to pay more, because the other thing that people don't realize too is that those people who pay more for insurance a lot of times are keeping the people afloat that don't pay as much, because it's a bucket that everyone pays into. It's not, okay,
Right,
I pay for my premium and my premium goes to
right.
my healthcare plan only. That's not how it works. Everyone's premiums go into a bucket for the healthcare, for the insurance provider, and it's all being spread out. So whether I pay $100 a month and you pay zero, maybe you go to the doctor 5 times and I don't go at all, but you didn't pay a premium. I did. So you're still reaping the benefit because of the premium that I paid.
Isn't that kind of this is all so silly, because that's part of the whole argument that I've heard, you know, from politicians against socialized medicine is, why should I pay taxes to cover somebody else? But in the private insurance companies, it's kind of the same thing, right? If we all buy Aetna, all the dollars go in together, and then for the person that does go to the doctor 5 times, I'm kind of paying for them if I
No,
don't
that's
go to the
true.
doctor.
No, that's true. But that's why you also have to have that choice. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Right.
you have to have that choice of where you're getting the funds from somewhere to help. It's the same thing with,
Right.
with your bank account and how we have FDIC insurance. That's other people's money that is in the bank at any given time. That if they have to pay out a claim to an individual, it could be your money, it could be my money. That's how it works. It's a pot that we all put
It's
in.
all socialism. Ah,
Well, I think that's how our society is meant to be, is that the reason why we have Social Security and we have Medicare and
mhm.
things like that are to help the people that need to be helped. But if all,
Right.
what, 350 million people, of us in the United States, if we all needed the same thing at the same time, the system couldn't handle it, i.e., the pandemic. Why do you think these hospitals are overrun? They don't have enough PPE because you have too much demand and not enough supply. Basic economics.
Isn't that kind of scary though?
Well,
That
of course.
hit like when shit hits the fan, the system isn't ready. Nobody's
Hmm.
ready.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what those of us who are paying attention to what's going on right now and the powers that be in various industries, they are looking at that. I know, the healthcare industry, insurance companies, because we don't even know what this is going to do to insurance premiums next year. So everybody's covering everything and things like that. But who knows what this is going to do to everyone's insurance premiums for 2021 and 2022 to make up for all the claims for coronavirus testing and treatment, because it's coming.
Yeah, especially it's kind of scary because you were saying earlier, nothing's really free.
No.
And when Trump released that video not too long ago saying, "Oh yeah, the treatment that I got, everyone's gonna be able to get it, and it's gonna be
Hmm.
free for everybody," and it's
Yep.
like, huh,
Yeah.
free.
It sounds so nice when you hear it. Everyone's, ears always perk up when you say free. Um, but what's free today may not be free tomorrow. I think that's
Right.
what people need to realize.
No, it's wild. So, kind of switching topics here. How has Atlanta and maybe Georgia in general been treating the whole Black Lives Matter movement, George
Hmm.
Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the whole
Hmm.
statue situation, right? Because
Hmm.
I know here in New York, some of the Columbus statues are still being protected because at any point, people can come by and just start throwing rocks at it or pulling it down. And
Yeah.
I know from experience down south, there's plenty of Confederate statues.
Yes. So I actually live not too far from a Confederate museum. Um, well, a Confederate memorabilia store. It's not a museum. They sell Confederate items. Um, and it makes my skin crawl every time I go near it, which I try not to. I don't go, I don't go past that very often for that reason. Um,
Is it just a store or is it
yeah.
actually like a museum?
Well, it's a store that has memorabilia from Confederate stuff. I'm not going to claim to be an expert because I've never been inside of the store. I can just
Mhm.
tell you what it says outside. Um, that's as far as I know.
Interesting.
That's as much as I know. I think to answer your question, you have to look at it kind of like what you said. There's Atlanta and then there's Georgia. So one of the great things about Atlanta is that what a lot of people call it, is a black mecca. And right now it's actually Black Hollywood because so many movies are being filmed here now. So I think Atlanta itself, I think has handled the Black Lives Matter movement very well. And I think as far as equality for African Americans and opportunities, which is part of the reason why I moved here personally, is for opportunities as an African American and the history in Atlanta. But that's Atlanta. That's not the rest of Georgia. The rest of Georgia is the good old South. And I think Atlanta itself is on the right track, but no place is perfect. There's police brutality in Atlanta, just like there's police brutality in New York, in LA, not to the same extent, not to the
Right.
same extent, but it exists. It exists. So I think the city of Atlanta has managed the movement and the protests very well. And you have a lot of celebrities here that can propel the movement here. So I think that's been helpful. But I do feel like it's an Atlanta thing. Like, I don't feel that the whole state of Georgia is concerned about the Black Lives Matter movement. This is an Atlanta issue, and which is part of the problem, obviously.
Yeah, this subject is so multidimensional, right?
Hmm.
Um, there's just so much to go at. Uh, but in terms of policing, do you? How can I ask this? I know that when I started, when George Floyd occurred, and I went to some of the, I hate to call them riots, but here in New York City, I mean, some of them were straight up riots. Some of these protests, it became very popular to say abolish police, defund police, all that good stuff.
Hmm.
Where do you think that that's an actual possibility or solution, or or what's your take on the policing aspect?
So when it comes to defund the police, I think that term has been taken away from the movement. Like a lot of things have been taken and misconstrued from the movement.
Hmm.
I think the key, what they what it means, in at least my interpretation with it, is we need first and foremost police accountability. Like any of us that have a job, particularly a job that can change people's lives, that can take someone's life, we have to
Right.
be accountable. And because there isn't that accountability across the board for police officers everywhere in this country, that's the first thing. And what defund the police really means, in my opinion, isn't abolish the police, isn't take money away so they can't function. It's to repurpose those funds. We wouldn't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on military tanks and battering rams and things like that and high powered weapons for local police officers if we put that money into education. If children and people in our society were better educated, there would be, in general, less crime. With less crime, you don't need as much police. With less
Right.
crime, you don't need police officers that are prepared for war instead of a wellness check
Right.
or someone
Right.
who stole a candy bar from a convenience store. So I think that's really what defund the police is saying, is that we need to repurpose those funds back into the community to prevent crime, to train police officers on how to interact with the public, not just from a racial perspective, which is important, but also from mental health, from just how to talk to people. We have this air in our society where police officers are, I don't know, they just have this godlike authority that they feel like they should have, which creates this instant animosity or combatant relationship with a lot of people. Why is that? I don't understand that. Like, I've never understood that. This whole yes sir, no sir. I don't understand that. I don't I don't you're not my parent. I'm not related to you. You're an adult. I'm an adult. You know, I can go on a tangent with that. But to my understanding and my interpretation, that's what defund the police is really about, is repurposing those funds to better help the community at large so you have less crime and less need for police to begin with.
Yeah, that's because I know a lot of the times conservatives, mainly conservatives, and mainly Republicans will use that term
Mhm.
to make the Black Lives Matter movement kind of dangerous or
Yep,
um, something that you should ignore or avoid.
correct.
And that being said, I have met a handful of people that really do support abolishing the police. And while that's, in a utopia, I get it. This is reality, and there are going to be situations where you kind of want to call the police, right? Those few people that really do believe in a utopian type of view where you don't need police, it's a very, very small voice, but it's amplified by those that don't want that type of reform on the police system.
Well, I would counter that to say that's part of the problem is that people have that viewpoint. But yes, there are people that are a part of the movement that really would like to have the police abolished. But to counter that point, I would say all of the people that are so supportive of their Second Amendment rights to own their guns, I'm sure some of them feel the same way that they don't need police. That's why they have their Second Amendment, gun case is because they feel as though they can protect themselves. So I don't think for people to say that it's just the Black Lives Matter movement that are saying defund the police, there's plenty of other people in this country that feel as though they don't need a large police presence because they'd rather handle problems on their own. Hence the Second Amendment and why these people have military style weapons, to protect their home. So I would just say that it's not just the people in the Black Lives Matter movement that believe that there can be a less of a police presence. There's people that are advocates for the Second Amendment that feel the same way and they believe in their right to protect themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's silly because I've seen posts. They will literally post pictures of their guns and or random, memes or whatever, where they're talking about ready to fight off the government, right? Because we don't need government. We don't need whatever.
And is
Don't
that
wait
not
for
the
the
same
police.
thing?
No, absolutely. I think at the moment, because Black Lives Matter is in the spotlight, Republicans and conservatives will always attack any flaw, right? So there's been a couple of protests that I'm at where, 99% of the people are peaceful or whatever, and then some, kid throw a rock, right, at a window. Immediately, the media will focus on that window and portray, whatever as a negative thing. And I think it's very unfortunate and very sad that a lot of people don't actually get multiple viewpoints. Kind of like you were saying, hey, it's not just one side. There's another side, right? So you can have 99 good people, but one bad person, all of a sudden you're saying, "Oh, no, that's an illegitimate movement." Again, rational minds I wish would come out and kind of win the day.
I think it's a lack of information. I think there are so many people that aren't informed and
Mhm.
that they need to find that information to make their own points of view. So just like every person that supports Black Lives Matter doesn't support defund the police, not every white
Right.
person is racist. So we have to be informed and educated enough that everybody isn't one thing, similar to what we
Right.
talked about before. And you just have to make your own decisions and come to your own conclusions based on having proper evidence on both sides.
Completely agree. And that's why, when I lived down south, I would argue with conservatives. Now that I live up here, I argue with liberals because you can never paint a brush across a movement, a side, a certain people. You just can't do that, right? You have to accept nuances where, yeah, maybe in general this is good, but let's talk about it. And that's the sad thing is that people don't want to talk about it these days.
Yeah, I agree.
And so this is part of the reason that I started this podcast is, give people a platform to kind of talk about not only their lives but have a conversation about anything and everything that's going on. And you know, your experience in the medical and healthcare world, and kind of explaining, hey, you know what? Yeah, social medicine maybe sounds nice sometimes, but they've got problems too, right? And people need to talk about those. And the problems that we have here, we need to talk about those too, right? Like how, like there is no silver bullet, but these conversations can get us closer to a more just world.
Absolutely.
But I do want to say thank you again for coming on. I know that it's a crazy world that we live in right now.
Yeah,
Middle of a pandemic, social movements, and God, winter is coming. I am
it
not ready for
is.
this. But you guys don't get that cold, right?
No, it's been 90 degrees in November before. It's ridiculous.
I didn't realize this when I moved up here, but the sun goes down like at 4:30, 4:45 in the middle of winter,
Hmm.
and I'm not okay with that. It makes me miss the South a lot on those days.
I'm the opposite. I miss the weather from up north. I miss actual winters, and this humidity I was not prepared for. Like I knew it would be hotter in Georgia compared to North Carolina. Like, oh, okay, I'm moving further down south, but the humidity I was not prepared for.
Is it that much worse?
Yes, like you'll step outside and you'll just start sweating. You don't even you don't have to do anything. Just come outside and you're just sweating. You feel gross.
Jesus. Yeah, well, that's definitely something that I do not miss. It gets a little bit humid up here in the middle of summer, but nothing that you know, nothing that will kill you.
Hmm.
Um, and I do remember it bad in North Carolina, but maybe it's even worse in Georgia.
It definitely is. It definitely is worse.
Well, hopefully you guys get some sort of a winter. You guys shut down also whenever it snows, right?
Oh yeah, they shut down real fast. Ever since that same year when they had that really bad storm in North Carolina where everything would, people were sliding all across the highway. It happened here too. I wasn't here. I was in North Carolina, but it was worse here. And ever since then, oh, they shut it down. They shut it down.
I expected New York to stay open no matter what. We got caught off guard with like a couple of inches of snow, and there were a lot of problems. I was like, huh, I thought they would be better prepared, but apparently because they didn't see this storm coming, they just caught the city off guard, and everybody was yelling at each other, and politicians being politicians, they're like, oh well, if this person had done their job, and they're like, no, if that other person had done their job. And it's like, hey guys, let's just get our shit together.
Basically, playing the blame game.
Right? It's annoying. Somebody just take accountability.
What is that? What is that word? What does that mean?
Ugh,
What is that?
unbelievable. Again, thank you for coming on and telling me, teaching me about medical stuff, and kind of your viewpoint on the whole Black Lives Matter. And yeah, I mean, people need to get educated. I need to get educated on my benefits, that's for sure.
Yes, you do.
And realize that, this is a complicated world, and you can't always paint everything black or white, right? There's a lot of gray. It's all gray, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you have a wonderful night, and I will talk to you later.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a good one, Pablo.